you've been in business long enough, you know that not all customers are good customers for your business. So how do you avoid those bad customers while really focusing in on the great customers? That's the topic for today's podcast episode. Hello, everyone. My name's Blake Benz. I'm the host of the Good Advice Podcast. If you're a first-time listener, welcome to the show. Thanks for tuning in to the best place to learn how to grow your business with actionable, practical ways. There's not a lot of fluff on this podcast. It's just the stuff that's, worked for me and worked for a lot of people who've come on this show. We've been podcasting for, almost 6 years now, over 400 episodes, and it's definitely a labor of love to be able to sit down and share some good advice on what you can be doing to grow your business. So let's talk today about red flags whenever you're talking to a potential customer, including how to avoid them and, more importantly, how to get clarity on the kinds of customers you really want to have. All that's on today's show. But before we dive in, we do have a word from one of the amazing businesses that is so kind to sponsor the podcast. If you ever thought about advertising on the show, you can always reach out, Blake at goodadvicecoaching.com to find out more. Or you can join our Patreons at our patreon.com/goodadvice website, where you can support the podcast for as little as the price of a cup of coffee, which these days could be anything. It's only $5 though. So you can check that out for more information. All that to say, let's run a quick ad and we'll be right back soon. There's one single piece of advice that I give to business owners who are ready to scale their business drastically. And that's knowing exactly what you need to hand off so that you can continue focusing on what you're an expert in. It amazes me when I talk to business owners who are doing their own bookkeeping and tax prep, and worse, that they're going through all this paperwork at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, even midnight, slaving away trying to make sense of all of the numbers for their business. Business owners who are making it happen have already figured out that you can't do it all yourself. That's why I recommend Steve Lay with Equity Business Solutions. Not only is he an expert in bookkeeping and tax prep, but what I love about Steve is that he'll sit down with you and help you make sense of the value of your business beyond just reading a spreadsheet. You'll be able to make better decisions, and more importantly, you're going to save yourself the crucial time you would have spent going through QuickBooks or an Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is that keeps us up late at night. So save yourself some time and some money by giving Steve Lay a call at Equity Business Solutions, and he'll show you the value beyond your numbers. Go to equitybusinesssolutionsllc.com to find out more. So I think as you get better at running a business, you begin to learn that not all customers are created equal. What I mean by that is, when you're young in business, and when I say young, I don't mean age-wise. I just mean like you're new to the world of entrepreneurship. Many of us can remember those days of, you're grinding away to get your next sale. You're trying to pay the bills. You're trying to maybe prove to yourself or others or someone important to you, like a spouse or family members or what have you, that you haven't gone off the deep end, that you are doing what you think is the right thing to do. And if nothing else, you're just trying to pay the way forward to live the life you want to live. Now, that's not to, it's not to imply, something extravagant. I think it's that many of us, especially if you've come from like a corporate background, you begin to think about what is my skill set? What was I made for? What can I bring to the table that maybe isn't being fully utilized in my corporate gig? So for many of us, when we start a business, there is a lot of emotion wrapped up in starting a business. There's a lot of not even so much anxiety, but it's not like let me put it this way. No one goes into business willy-nilly, casually, I'll just see if this goes anywhere. Unless, of course, we're talking about a side hustle. But no one commits themselves full-time to the 9 to 5, which is underselling it, for the 8 to 8 o'clock at night grind of trying to grow a business if they don't fully believe in it and care about what they're actually doing. All that to say, the more you get into business, the more you begin to learn that not only are some customers better than others, but some customers are awful. And what I mean by that, I think sometimes we think that a bad customer is a cheap customer, that a bad customer is, a crazy person. I'll just say right away that I don't think that's always the case. I think sometimes you can have a perfectly well-meaning person, a perfectly normal person who just is not a good customer for you. This could be any number of reasons. This could be someone who perhaps they're not in the right place to fully utilize your services. For example, if you sell SEO and you're working with someone who's a brand new business owner, they may not have really clarity on their offer. They may not have really their own sales engine really revved up. So while can SEO be useful for them? Absolutely. Will they get the full benefit of it? Maybe not. Now, the person who runs that business, again, could be perfectly well-meaning, could be a really great person, but may not actually be a really great customer for you. Part of this is because sometimes when people come to us and they want some extra help, when they haven't fully developed the foundation for their business, you find yourself really bending over backwards to sort of kind of create the momentum that they don't have. I think going back to the example of like SEO, or if we just talk about like digital marketing, for example, good marketing is an add-on to what the business is already doing. I think when a business is very young and underdeveloped, the marketing side of things becomes unfairly weighed as like all of our eggs are in this basket. Like this marketing effort has to generate all the momentum that the business doesn't currently have. And it's not a great place to be in if you're somebody who sells marketing services. So we're not talking today just about crazy people. We're talking about those kinds of customers too. And what I want to do today is I want to walk through just some basic things that you might hear in your selling process that should clue you in to either get more information from your prospective buyer or to flat out be like, hey, I need to run away from this person. This person is not going to be a good customer for me. And we'll talk also about how do you navigate that? What do you do with that? What are some ways you can respond to realizing someone's not a great customer? So let's talk about red flags. I think the most like low-hanging fruit, just going through a handful of these, one of the most obvious ones is when someone leads with, gosh, you're so expensive. Oh my gosh, you charge what? Are you kidding me? And then they go on, they have an issue. They have an issue from the get-go on the value of your services. I think, by the way, this positions you poorly from a sales perspective. And this is typically the issue I have with this is when a customer has a problem with your price point, when they're complaining about your price point, when they're talking about someone else who can do it for cheaper, and yet they still end up working with you, oddly enough. What I have found is that more often than not, you find yourself in a position where you're constantly having to prove your value to that person rather than that value being clear from the get-go. And I think it's kind of an unachievable feat. I think it's like if you're dating someone, let's go back to like the high school days when you went on like your first date and it's awkward and uncomfortable. Maybe you met someone for the first time and you went on a date with them. You're grabbing a slice of pizza with someone, and from the get-go, they say, oh, you're, I gotta make up an example now. Oh, you're a Razorback fan? Man, my last boyfriend was also a Razorback fan, and I hated him. He was so annoying. Yada, yada, Well, how are you going to feel? You're immediately going to be like, oh, well, I want to prove to this person I'm not a crazy person. I just wore the hat. I don't even like the Razorbacks. I don't know what you might say or do, but if someone was to present something like that to you, you would always feel the need to prove that, hey, I'm not like that other guy. I think sometimes people also come to us in our services and they're like, hey, yeah, the last marketing company really burned me. Hey, yeah, the last consultant I work with really ate up all of my budget and didn't accomplish very much. Sometimes, by the way, when someone says something like this to me, I really try to lean in and understand what happened previously. Because there's many bad actors out there where I'll talk to someone, well, what happened? Tell me more about that. I'm really curious. And what they describe, they are not normal practices. Like the company that they worked with, I'm like, oh, geez, that's really interesting. That's not the norm. I'm surprised they did that, what have you. More often than not, though, when I have these conversations with people, they say something where I think, that's pretty normal. That's pretty normal. I had a guy I was talking to who, for early on in the conversation, we found out he didn't have the budget to hire me. But we were just still making small talk as we were kind of finishing up the conversation. And he said, yeah, actually, you're not the first agency that I talked to. I actually talked to this other agency, and you wouldn't believe it. Because I didn't have the money to hire them, they asked me to give them a portion of every sale to pay for their services. So every dollar that I make, I have to pay out a fee to them for bringing me new business. And I thought that was insane. And I was listening and kind of like, well, since you can't hire them outright, they're taking on all the risk, expecting you to actually grow your business. So it's actually pretty understandable that they would ask you for a portion of your profits. Again, they're taking on all the risk. But I hear this a lot, like in the marketing world, in the SEO world, some of these things where like the results can be a little less tactile. Sometimes I hear complaints from people in business who are like, yeah, this is what my agency did with me. And I hear them and I'm just kind of like, yeah, that's what they were supposed to do. That is what they're supposed to do. Otherwise, sometimes I hear things where I'm like, that's weird. Like, for example, someone was telling me about an agency they hired who built them a website. And they're like, yeah, they said they couldn't get to the mobile version of the website, but they would focus on that for next quarter. And I thought, I mean, if you're going to build any version of a website, you would think mobile should be the first one, right? And how odd that there's such a delay on building the mobile version of the page when a lot of times these things can be a bit transferable in terms of the design you put on one setup versus the other. All that to say, when a potential customer complains about price, when they complain about past experiences, when they are, I think when they just come from they come to me with like a tone of accusation almost. I had a guy who hired me a couple of years ago, and like from the first conversation, he said something like, I don't want you to screw me over, like something like that. And it kind of threw me because I was like, you called me. You called me to hire me. Like, this is such a weird starting point for us. And I've learned that people who don't see the value of what you're doing from the get-go typically don't end up being great customers. What you want is someone who calls you and says, hey, I hear you're the best. Hey, I really need your services. I'm at a point in my business where I really see the value in what you're offering, and I trust you enough to hire you. One of the most common things we talk about in the sales world is, and it's kind of a tacky topic these days. I actually don't really prefer to think of it this way, but objection handling. What do you say when someone fires off an objection to what it is you're offering to them? And the reason I say it's a little bit tacky is because I think sometimes we've lost the concept of a genuine sales conversation, which should be about us gaining clarity together on what the problem is and if my service can really solve it, and us mutually both being okay if the answer is no. But if the answer is yes, me feeling comfortable like laying down my cards and being like, this is what it costs. This is what it looks like. This is the norm. You tell me, do you want to, you don't? Okay, great. Thank you. My personality is so much more, and maybe I'm just not great at sales. I don't know. It's such a wild concept, but like when a customer or a potential customer says, no, I don't see the value in that, I don't want to hire you, I don't take that as a blow to my ego of like, well, hang on, let's go back here. Let's talk this through. My personality is, okay, thanks for letting me know. You just saved me some time, right? But anywho, talking about objection handling, I think what's interesting in this whole conversation is we've become very keen to think about it's almost like chess. It's like they make this move, now you make that move. They say this, now you be ready to say that. And I think in a way, we're almost getting a little bit too, I don't say too methodical about it, but like we're losing a little bit of the nuance of an actual sales conversation. Either way, when I'm having a great sales conversation, I don't feel like I'm having to prove my value from the get-go. Now, I might have to inform. Someone might say, "Hey, I've never paid for something like this. What is it like? What does it entail? What's typical?" Like, do I if we're talking about the consulting side of my business, do I pay you and then I hear from you in 6 months? Like, do you give me like a physical document that I worked? Like, what the heck is this? So I'm comfortable with someone being unclear on the process. But people who aren't sure of your value, I have learned, like I said, it's hard. It's hard to start a relationship with someone who already sees a lack of value in you. So someone who complains about the price, they complain about your expertise from the get-go. I had a guy who called me who he said something like, "Well, anybody can do what you do." So I kind of just smiled and was like, a lot of people can do what I can do. But not everyone gets the results that I can get. And you don't have to even necessarily say something like that. It's not, I think sometimes we look for like the witty clapback of like, well, this is what you say in response. And like sometimes it's, there's plenty of other times where someone says a comment like that to me and I just say, okay, all right, cool. Sounds good, man. I just let it roll off. I don't even think about it because it kind of just is what it is, right? What you want though is someone who calls you, and it's always funny talking about this because I think people think this is, and I mentioned this in a previous episode, people think this is mythological. Like this is, oh, it'd be great if customers were like this. I have customers right now who are like this, who are like, hey, yep, I know it's expensive. Hey, yep, I know it's pricey. Yep, I know the value's there. Yes, let's work together, yada, yada. And it's a fairly easy sale. Sometimes though, going back to my point earlier on objection handling, I think we're so keen on like these, like what to say instead of just realizing that someone's not a good customer for you. Like someone just isn't a good fit for you. It's like for Podcastable, when someone reaches out and they're like, "Hey, yeah, I want to start a podcast." And I ask them like, "What do you think about podcasts? What do you listen to?" And they say, "Oh, I hate podcasts. I don't even like podcasts." That's usually a sign that this probably is not a great customer for me. So that's all under the umbrella of the first thing. When they don't see the value there, the value's in their mind, the value's not there. Second thing I would say is customers, in terms of a red flag, customers who act like they know your craft better than you. I had a customer come to me. We were doing some SEO. We were doing some marketing. I had a customer come to me, and this was probably maybe 3 or 4 months ago. And he was like, "Well, I actually have a really extensive background in SEO," which didn't bother me, by the way. He was talking about his length of time in the SEO world, and I thought, yeah, you probably know a few more things than I do. I'm open to feedback. That's great. But what I realized was once we started working together, I realized that his background in SEO was like a very general understanding of SEO, and it wasn't a practical expertise driven understanding. It would be like if someone, like if you're, let's say you do mortgages and someone says like, "Hey, I actually have a pretty extensive background in the mortgage industry," and they know what an interest rate is, but they don't know the nuance of anything else in your industry. These are people who can be fairly difficult to work with because they aren't willing to get out of their own way and let you do your job. I had somebody who hired me to do some newsletter content for them. And there was some chatter early on the content of the newsletter. And there was a little bit of a vibe of like, okay, you've hired me. Remember, you've hired my expertise. Now, on the same token, this can be really valuable on the same token. This can be really valuable because sometimes someone has like industry knowledge that you don't have. I can't fully know every industry there is. So fortunately, in this circumstance, this person who hired me was sharing that industry knowledge. Hey, here's what a typical customer thinks. This is how they operate. This is what they look like, what have you. This is where they are in their phase of life. So that can be really valuable. It can be really insightful, but I think balancing that nuance, that line of you're giving me added insight, but you're trusting me to do my job, that's an important thing to navigate. And then I think the last thing I'd say for a red flag would be people who are, I don't know the word I would use. They are not grateful for the work you're doing. And this is a little bit of a weird one, I think, because I think many people have the perspective of, I hired you to pay a service. Excuse me. I paid you to do a service. I hired you to do a job. I have expectations around how that job is done, which all of that is totally fine. It's totally understandable. You've paid good money for someone to do a service for you. However, I have found my best customers to see our work as fairly collaborative. It's a business agreement. We're doing business together. Excuse me. Sorry. We're doing business together. I'm not working for you. I'm not your employee. If you wanted me to be your employee, you could have hired an employee, right? I say that because my best customers, I'm amazed as to how grateful they are for my work for them. I'm amazed as to how often I'm told, hey, thank you so much. Thank you for working for me. Hey, thank you for doing this with us. Hey, great work. Thank you. Hey, thanks for being available. The amount of times I'm told thank you from my best customers versus customers. I had a customer years ago who we just weren't aligned on expectations. He was always calling me, always reaching out. And it almost felt like he was implying I wasn't doing enough as I was sitting in a parking lot while my family ate dinner at a restaurant inside. I thought to myself, what am I doing with this person? This is such a weird conversation I'm having with this person at 6:00 at night on me somehow not doing enough for this person's business. So great customers are going to value not just your expertise, they're going to value your time, they're going to value your work, and they're going to be grateful. It's always blown my mind how I can have customers who spend thousands of dollars with me, and yet they're the ones saying thank you. They're the ones sending a thank you card in the mail. Like, what a bizarre concept, right? I should be totally indebted to these people for hiring me and paying me a fee and, what have you. And instead, it's always such an interesting reflection on the type of customers that I try to have, in that they are simply grateful people. So what do you do if you find yourself talking to someone who the red flags are there and they seem like they're not going to be a great customer? Well, first things first, I think many of us know that even customers that seem great on paper may not actually be a great customer. I have a customer of mine who he had a customer who was a very much high ticket customer. It was going to be like a $50,000 or $60,000 job for my customer, but it was going to take the span of like 9 or 10 months. It was going to be all this extra work. Had certain expectations around things that he needed to do. And as we talked it through, it was like, man, yeah, the line item on your P&L is pretty great. The line, I mean, bringing in the 60K, that's a great feeling. But is this really a great customer? Is this really a great idea for you? And let's navigate that together. So, not all customers that are great on paper are actually great customers. But what do you do? What do you say? How do you respond when you start to realize that someone isn't a great customer? Or, excuse me, or you begin working with someone and you realize, oh no, this person's a terrible customer. The story they told me about their last agency being awful, oh my gosh, I'm realizing that you're the problem. You're the issue. You are the issue in terms of why this isn't working, right? So, what do you do? How do you navigate that? What do you say? Okay. First things first, let's say you haven't started working with the person yet. What you can say is, hey, thank you so much for chatting with me. I don't think I'm the right fit for you, but here are a couple of other options in our area, or here's a couple of places you can look to find another company that'd be happy to work with you. So I was in a conversation with a lady this last week. We sat down. I knew immediately we weren't going to be a great fit. Again, not a crazy person, just someone like I just knew she was saying, hey, I want to work together. But as I was asking questions, I just knew like this isn't the right kind of customer for me. And so I was just actually just very candid and direct. I just said, hey, I empathize with where you are in your business. I'm not a great fit for you. I'm not a great, I'm best served with this type of customer, not where necessarily you are currently. So I think just being candid can be a great way to navigate this. Other ways you might navigate this is you can quote an exorbitant fee. And it's not, you're not trying to like put this person over a barrel, but for some customers, you get a sense of how much extra time and work they're going to be. And so you price that accordingly, even if it's significantly higher than what you would typically charge. I've had people that were a real pain in the rear that I thought, man, I really wish I had charged you double. If you get better at sales, ideally you get to the point where you can realize from the get-go, I should really charge this person double. I should really charge this person triple, so that if this person ends up being as bad as a train wreck as I think they will be, I at least got paid for my time. More often than not, though, if someone's coming to you, they're complaining about price, they're complaining about the value, and you quote this high fee, more often than not, that person is going to price themselves out. They'll say, oh, that's too expensive. Thank you. I'm going to go with someone else. Oh, okay. Darn. Okay. See you later. So you handle it that way. If, however, you find yourself already working with the person and you realize they're a real, pain in your rear, they're a real headache, what you can do is you can finish the deliverables on you can do a couple things actually. First, you can finish the deliverables on where you are in your business. And then before you move on to the next phase of your project, you can say, hey, keep the second half of what's owed, keep whatever's coming, what have you. Because of the nature of our conversations, because of some of the things that you've addressed that we're not serving you well in, I think it would be better served for you to find an alternate company. Here are a couple of examples. So I had a gentleman who we just didn't click. We were totally misaligned on what the work would look like together. It was a 9-month process. We got to around month 4 or 5. He had the second half of his invoice due that next month. We had a real honest conversation. Neither of us were happy. And I just essentially said, hey, you know what? Why don't we just go our separate ways? And he was like, yeah, you keep what I've paid already. And I was like, yep. And you keep what you owe. Don't even worry about it. Let's just go our separate ways. And by the way, here are a couple of my local competitors who I think do great. They do great business. They do a great job. You're welcome to contact any one of them. Again, with all of these things, you can't take it too personal because it's just business. We are doing business together. It's a business transaction. And if I can't serve you the best, I want to help you find someone who can. And similarly, if you are infringing on my ability to run my business well, then I'm going to fire you. I'm going to move on from you. I'm going to, hey, you know what? I mean, I had a guy who, one of my first customers ever, year one, one of my first customers, it just wasn't a great relationship. He pretty much never did anything that we agreed on. He never took my advice. He wasn't ever really mad about my advice, but there definitely was like this, darn, my business is really struggling. And I'd be like, yeah, and I said it would. You're not doing any of the things that we agreed for you to do. And so when it came time for our contract, when it came to an end, and it was time for him to re-up, which I typically ask people at the end of our time together, I say, hey, do you want to keep working together? Is there still a need for us to keep working together? And if they say yes, I'm like, all right, great, let's write up another contract. Well, in the case with this gentleman, I literally didn't even ask. I didn't ask. I didn't, I didn't even say like, yeah, hey, you want to work together again? Now, I did send this guy a survey. I did send him, hey, I want to get your feedback. What do you think? What did you think about our work together? Now, I had intended to look at that feedback with an eye of like not taking it too, like kind of with a grain of salt. But then wouldn't you, how funny is it? He gave me a glowing review. He gave me like 5 stars across the board and was like, this was amazing. So, maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I should have kept working with this guy, but I personally wasn't happy because for me, when I work with someone, we're trying to accomplish a result together. And I kind of felt myself thinking, even though this person's happy with me, we're not really achieving what we set out to do together. So I'd rather direct my efforts out elsewhere. But all that to say, if you have a bad customer, it is okay to walk away from that customer. And sometimes it's hard to do that. Sometimes a customer is a great customer in terms of what they pay you on paper, and that can make walking away a little bit more difficult. I had a customer that it was $60K over 3 years was what we had discussed on the outright of our contract. And I thought, wow, $60K over 3 years, this is going to be a pretty good customer. At the end of year 1, I walked away from it. I walked away and was like, you know what? This is just a little too messy. Y'all need to work some things out. Y'all are crazy disorganized, and it's costing me time. It's costing me money, and it's not really enjoyable work. Now, I didn't say all of these things to these people because, again, it's not about me getting like a one-up on someone. It was, hey, I'm going to depart from this project. Thank you so much. Let's not worry about year 2, year 3. Y'all just take it from here. And I wish you the best. Now, would my life be easier with $40K in my bank account? Yes, it would. But I honestly, to this day, I do not regret walking away from that gig because it did so much more for my business, not getting engaged with that. So if you're listening to this, what I have found is that people who listen to content like this, none of this is new. None of this is like, oh, I never thought I shouldn't have a bad customer. What I have found is that it's usually the tension between, man, I really need to get paid. I really need that cash now, which is all the more reason to focus in on running your business better, on getting help to run your business better so that you can avoid those customers. You can focus in on the great customers that you have. And so the pain of saying no to those people is non-existent. You can say no because there's 5 other customers lining up to work with you, and you don't even have to think about it. When the business is young and we're still developing these things, it's hard to say no because we're thinking, well, where is the next customer? Where's the next one going to come from? So all the more reason to go to be as intentional as possible on growing your business the right way and developing a healthy business. Hey, thanks for tuning in to today's episode. That's the end of our show today. If you have any questions or comments about the show, you can always reach out, blake@goodadvicecoaching.com. Other than that, that's today's good advice. We'll catch you later. See ya.